All right. The abstract delineated the fact that we're going to present with regard to renewable energy as well as large-scale oil and gas. But for the brevity of time, what I want to do is focus on oil and gas, but I will touch as I can with regard to renewable energy project, basically best management practices to mitigate environmental impacts with a focus here on botany and the concept of wildlife species. And I want to take a little bit of a commercial there for the Secretary of the Interior, as I affectionately and others within my domain call him Secretary Solazar. But I want to share with you the scale of energy development on the public land so that you have a sense. This is the Ivanpah Solar Energy Generation Project southwest of Las Vegas, Nevada. And you're looking at primarily a footprint here that's 1.25 miles square. There's over 100,000 heliostats that will actually, or mirrors that are being installed to actually heat up a receiver, a solar boiler that sits on top of a 460-foot, basically it's an offshore oil and gas platform. There's 3 of these that are here. And this gives you a sense of what's in play so that you can understand there's a very silent story that's transpired. And in light of the fact of the discussions here in Utah, I can share this with you. There is a substantial amount of project work that's being approved, that's being moved very quickly, whether it's oil and gas, coal, renewable energy, you name it. And as an example, what we've got here is that with regard to solar energy, we've got a total of 18 projects that have been approved over the last 2 years, and these are utility scale solar projects for a total of 5,000, almost 6,000 megawatts. And to give you a sense of scale, the IPP power plant near Delta, Utah is 1,500 megawatts. So this is looking at almost close to 4 power plants worth of solar energy. This gives you a sense of what's pending. We currently have a total of 25 utility scale projects, and there's actually over 100 applications for solar projects on the Bureau lands as I speak. That gives you a relative sense associated with the acreage there as well. This kind of gives you a little bit of a sense real quick with regard to the use of offshore oil and gas platform technology that Bechtel has brought into play for this project. For the project operator, again, 460 feet, you're looking at about 132 megawatts a tower, and gives you a little bit of a sense. Go on real quick here. What's important here is that these are an example of the heliostats, the mirrors, and the resting position that's out there on the ground. You'll notice that this solar project has no surface disturbance. They haven't gotten out and bladed the ground totally flat. That basically is often a prescription with regard to that infrastructure. These were done through 2-track roads and the use of track hole equipment that basically allows them to drill this, push it, and these things are the relative size of basically a two-car garage door. Let's touch real briefly here with regard to wind energy. As an example, the Bureau's approved a total of 10 wind projects. Just recently, we've approved the Chokecherra Sierra Madre project south of Rawlins, Wyoming. That's the largest wind project in the United States at this point. That is 1,000 turbines, 3,000 megawatts. It's bigger than anything in the Panhandle of Texas or the Kansas, Texas area. You can see again the types of aerial extent here, and again about just over 5,000 megawatts. We've actually got 2 here in Utah that we've approved. This picture is the Milford Wind Corridor project. We saw the governor through Cody's earlier presentation. The Bureau in this case did 2 phases. There's 205 megawatts, and these were done with environmental assessments. We've actually got a phase 4 for Milford that's 275 additional turbines. That'll actually put the project at 605 turbines. It's a very large project. It's actually a sleeper. The project's currently on hold with regard to the project developer, but in essence, it's happening. Geothermal, very quickly. You're looking at the fact that a total of 9 projects for geothermal have been approved over the last couple of years, primarily in Nevada. Just this past week, we've approved a project for Cove Fort, a decommissioning and reconstruction of an existing or an older power plant to a much more efficient technology associated with basically a Rankine system. But this gives you a sense of what's in play, so there's quite a bit. Now, let's get into oil and gas. And what I wanted to do is give you, again, a sense of the type of development that's occurring on the public lands. Here is the list of major project EISs that the BLM Utah is addressing. Principally, all of these are in the Uinta Basin. We've recently approved the Greater Natural Buttes Project EIS and Gasco Project EIS for about a total of 5,000 proposed wells. We're talking about the fact that those encompass about 2,000 pads. And then you can see some fairly significant other projects that are pending out here, and these are quite large in nature. Let me give you a sense. As an example, for Greater Natural Buttes, you're talking about a project footprint of 255 square miles. 255 square miles. That's huge. Okay? Almost 600 miles of new roads. We're talking about over 1,000 miles of new pipelines, 2 gas compressor stations, 17 water handling facilities like Cody had mentioned earlier, the consolidation of central facilities, including injection facilities to handle produced water. We're talking about a disturbance area of an entire area of almost 13 square miles, which is in essence a little less than 5% of the entire surface out there. That's why these projects can't be approved in 3 days. These are huge. They take time, and the aspects that Scott Donato brought to light with regard to Bill Barrett Corp. And others have brought to light weighs very heavily on the concept of pre-planning and doing these things with appropriate stakeholders. Let's go on. Second one up here, Gasco, 323 square miles, about 200 miles of new roads, over 300 miles of pipeline, expanding 2 gas plants, disturbance area of about 44 square miles, or about 13%. Okay, that's over a 15-year development period. That's going to be fairly substantial construction for a long period of time. Okay, so now let's get into the BMPs here. What I want to do is basically talk about the major BMP categories, and I've got examples of some that engage towards what Roger had spoke of here earlier. But the use of comprehensive master development plans is is an area here associated with approaches. The ability to reduce the initial and interim surface disturbance, the consolidation of infrastructure into corridors and operational sites, the use of remote operations and monitoring technology, the elimination of hazards to wildlife, and additional work associated with noise abatement. Okay, let's go on out here. If you can see, hopefully this isn't washed out with the PowerPoint towards the back, when you look at this landscape out here, there's a lot of disturbance out there. All right, what could we have done differently? You know, when we sat down, the problem is that our agencies for years have done this 1 permit at a time. That's not the way we do it. We haven't been doing that for quite some time. Comprehensive planning has started with the Bureau in 1997. We've been doing this almost 20 years. The concept here is single facility, single permit. They lay pipelines to it. They drill another well. You've got adjacent ties that tie in up here. You know, the problem is this is 1 permit at a time. There's no, and now we're dealing with the aspects of this development, greater infill drilling. How do we approach this? Well, the concept here is, you know, the master development plan, plans for development. We've wrestled with this issue as an example of the Pinedale and Jonah fields up there, where we get in, we space for 160-acre wells. We now downspace to 80s, we downspace to 40s, we downspace to 20 and 10-acre well spacing, as we've learned how to develop and produce those Mesa Verde sands. Well, the concept comes into play. We're being able, we want to look at, and you'll see this as an example where we designed for access, 1 point of access, plan in advance, and everything spurs. This is an example of the alternative C with the Gasco final EIS. And you can see by the legend over here on the left about what's proposed and what's existing. This is huge. This is what we're involved with, whether you're talking North Dakota, whether you're talking Powder River Basin of Wyoming, the Green River Basin of Wyoming, Uinta Basin, Piance, you can go all over the Rocky Mountains and all over the major oil and gas basins, and this is the type of development that we're seeing now, because the commodity and the technology is there. Okay, the use of comprehensive development plans. The plans reduce surface disturbance, habitat loss, which is a key thing here that Darren wants us to help highlight, soil erosion, as Roger just spoke, visual impacts. Planning saves money. It optimizes construction outlays, the need for additional surveys and additional permits. It helps to avoid confusion. It improves the stakeholder understanding of the proposed actions through time. Master development plans should address, as Scott pointed out earlier, sensitive areas to be avoided or mitigated. Okay? Planned energy facilities and road locations, phased as necessary. Plans for interim and final surface reclamation and other types of mitigating actions. Okay? So again, just touching on the concept of comprehensive master plans. Okay, let's go on to the next approach area about reducing initial and interim surface disturbance. Okay, facility pads, no matter what they are, should be designed to minimize surface disturbance. In the past, generally these well locations, as an example, have always been rectangles designed for the drilling equipment that's out there. The drilling technology has been evolving as well. Here's an example of a relatively small pad. Well locations used to be on the order of 3 to 4 acres for big, deeper rigs, generally, or larger. Here you're looking at 10,000 yards of soil. Pads don't have to be regular. They need to basically, they can be modified through the civil work out there to fit the landscape. And then also, as an example, less disturbance, less habitat loss, less reclamation. You're moving less earth out there. That's big money when you're having heavy equipment out there to do this kind of thing. Okay, less cost to build. It's serious money. The industry has enjoined this kind of situation here. I mean, this is now standard practice. It's nothing new. Next thing here, reduce the amount of bare ground after drilling and well completion. Okay, here's a pad out there that's just been, the well's been drilled, they've had completion rig out there, they've got production equipment, the well's now producing. And what you're looking at here is this the unreclaimed portion of that well that should stay there through the productive life. It may be there for 15 years, may be there for 20 years, may be there for 60 years. Folks, you got to remember, oil and natural gas as an example is a temporal use of the land. Those fields after 60 years, 70 years, or 80 years will be plugged out and gone. It's a temporal use. The concept of recontoured and seeded areas out here. This is important. You know, why stop at 1 1/3 acre out there? Reduce this well pad size as much as possible. It's important too that when you've got heavy equipment out there and you're building these locations, you can bring them back and actually deal with recontouring and to rework that land. It's cheaper when the equipment's out there at that time rather than 15 years later and you come out and you reclaim. The capital cost of moving earth is much more expensive. You know, the concept here is to minimize the habitat loss and fragmentation, reestablish as much habitat as possible by maximizing area reclaimed during well production operations. In many cases, this interim reclamation can nearly, you can cover the entire site, right up to the road in the facilities, the teardrop. Another one here, local natives will typically reestablish themselves on the site, helping to restore proper species and compositions. So once it's disturbed, if we can go out and actually bring it back as quickly as we can, that helps. You know, here's some examples over here where we've got a former barren well pad, and this through time illustrates what happened. You can barely make out the well facility that's back out there on location. The steps, fully contour and needed areas to the original contour or contours that blend with the surrounding topography. Respread topsoil over the entire pad. Revegetate to establish you know, while you still have the soil biology. You know, that's one of the key items here. Interim roads. In fact, this was spoken earlier by Scott. Here's the standard road, engineered for use. Road arrays may fragment the habitat. There's no question. Ditches erode each time it rains, depending on the moisture and slope and etc. Annual maintenance includes blading and weed control if required. Roger just hit on this fact. Sheetgrass City, okay? There's other ways we can deal with this. With interim road reclamation, use oversized bog ditches covered with topsoil and seeded. Bring it back. Consider seeding the road surface for low-use roads. Establish forage and habitat. I mean, you bring it back. You help partially restore it. This is what we're doing now. This is what we can do. This is what we need to do more of. But in appropriate places at appropriate times, obviously. Here's an example of an access corridor with interim road reclamation. Okay, there's a power line that's buried there. There's actually a pipeline that's buried there that's been seeded over. And then here's the road. The concept of creating well-designed corridors and integrating and minimizing that surface disturbance is key here. Use of minimally engineered roads. Right now the Bureau has engineering standards for work on the public lands. Bureau roads must be designed to an appropriate standard no higher than necessary to accommodate their intended functions. Well, I spent a measure of my career as the coal bed methane coordinator for the Bureau in Wyoming. We had a project out there literally 1/4 of the size of Wyoming. We're talking 51,000 coal bed methane wells. They've drilled 31,000 out there. The concept here is the use of 2-track roads because these wells can be drilled in about 3 days. So you don't need to put a bladed road in here. So drive across it, bury it. The equipment is an example. 2-track in many cases can be used. It depends on the resource recovery that you're engaged with. The deeper natural gas kinds of work we have here generally wouldn't apply here, but it gives you an example of the tools that can be done to help mitigate. You got to look at the use of the road and go from there. Okay, here's one that's kind of interesting. Roger hit on this earlier. An emerging practice under study that actually came from the Canadians out of Canada, up there on the tundra. The muskeg, the concept of mat board well pads. And what we're seeing in places like Pinedale-Jonah is where we have well downspacing and the concept of well hubs and spoke pads. And the use of wooden mats as an example, and I'll show this in a second, for well locations so that you don't go out there and actually create a well location in the dirt. You're actually putting matting boards out here on the surface because what you have is you have a centralized production facility. These wells are tied together by lines to a central pad. You have the surrounding wells that are on pipeline spokes. And generally what has been tested is we go out and we actually mow the sagebrush. We take it down to a certain level, but don't destroy it so it can come back. And the concept here is like this. This is what it looks like. Where you're talking about well locations up here, and you can see the contrast up there. These are oak mats that are laid out right on top of the existing undisturbed ground with these well facilities out there. High density drilling. They're drilling wells on 20-acre spacing, 10-acre spacing, or better. Here's an example here where the mat boards have been removed. The brush out there was actually mowed. So what does it look like? Okay, these are what these locations look like. You can see as we go here the area that's been basically crushed because of the weight of these things there, and areas that basically there is no mat. But the concept is the species it's still viable. It's still there. You haven't damaged it. This is what the Canadians have been doing on basically up on the muskeg in frozen tundra. And so in Canada wanted to actually exercise and pilot this in the Pinedale-Jonah field. Thank you. Okay, let's go on. Next major area, consolidate infrastructure into corridors and operational sites. Others have kind of mentioned this. We'll just touch on this briefly. Drilling multiple directional wells from a single pad reduces the surface disturbance for wildlife. Okay, and as an example, here's 16 wells on one pad where you don't have to construct 15 pads, 15 roads. You don't have 15 other arrays of production equipment out there. Of course, the cost to drill directional wells is there. That's an added cost, but the technology, as been described earlier, has been dramatic. You know, the feasibility to do this kind of thing is based on the subsurface geology and the depth and the geometry of the well bores you've got to drill. And I can tell you, the Rhone Plateau, not far from this, I haven't had the chance to track this. I read the technical literature quite a bit, and I recall that there was an approval for a pad that would actually have upwards of about 85 or 86 wells on a single pad. The concept of drilling enclaves. Okay, run gathering lines, oil, gas, water, and condensate to centralized production facilities, away from sensitive resources and habitat. You know, what it does is it eliminates thousands of fluid handling truck trips to individual wells and smaller tank batteries, less disturbance to wildlife because these haul trucks are not running during critical periods of time. Okay, and you may be able to use lower road construction standards out there because you don't need the load work out there. Okay, centralized frac pads. This is a biggie, the concept of frac factories. Here's a multi-well pad, 2 to 3 acres, which is relatively small. Here's a frac pad over there. There's a water line, and what they're doing is they're basically pumping through laid out production lines or frac lines to these wells, multiple wells, and they'll frac these wells 10, 12, 15, 30, 40 times in a single wellbore, depending on the staging they do. Okay, allows for each pad to be smaller because it no longer has to be designed to handle the equipment that's going to be put on it. So the individual well pads out here, as an example, are relatively smaller. Water is piped from the central handling facilities out to these frac pads, these frac factories. In Pinedale Anticline, the productivity of fracking went from about 30 to 35 frac jobs a month, say for a fracking crew, to the concept of frac pads that they run 24/7 with man camps, the whole 9 yards, and they pump over 850 frac jobs in a single month. It's huge, and they've been doing that for years now. So again, we want to share this with you. The other side of that is the fluids are often flowed back to these facilities and they're reused. Okay, let's go on. Burying lines, consolidation. Here's, I think, a good one. Standard method is trench and lay. Spider plow. This is another Canadian technology. The Canadians are good at the use of their flexible flow lines for condensates, oils, waters, etc. Bottom line is you can take that spider plow and you can actually pull 6-inch tubing, 6-inch pipe that will handle the pressures that are necessary to run these fluids. And the wild thing about it is there's virtually no scar. It's like running fiber optics out there on the ground. And this has been used in certain areas. Powder River Basin is a good example. We actually we wanted to look at the use of the spider plow to pull power lines between wind turbines down on the Milford Wind Corridor. It's dependent on the soil, and if you've got rocky soil or rocky outcrops, you can't do it. Use of remote operations and monitoring technology. This will be quick. Like I say, reduce the number of trips made by personnel during periods of wildlife, etc. If you don't have it, bottom line is here's production equipment for a multi-well pad. There's the telemetry unit. So they only roll out to it when there's a need to go out there. They're not out there checking charts or taking measurements or doing whatever until they need to go out for it. Okay. Eliminate hazards to wildlife and reduce noise. One thing we need to do is you've got to realize that BMPs must be properly designed, constructed, and maintained. You've got to monitor and inspect and enforce these BMPs to make sure they're effective. You know, netting to avoid mortality of a fowl is not going to be good if you put it out there and you're not out there monitoring what's going on. So as an example, this aspect about placing pits to avoid the loss or the mortality of wildlife is not effective. And again, this design was poor. You know, the key here is don't put fluids out there, and darn sure you don't put oil on it, and maybe you don't even build a pit. That might be the better way to do it. And it is often. Okay, I'm just gonna, these are all kind of self-explanatory. All right, let's go on. Discouraging perching over there for raptors as an example. This is a biggie from the renewable side as well, especially if you've got sensitive species. Noise. These are a little bit older slides, but this is an example of a natural gas compressor with an open facility to the top up here where the noise is directed straight up. Same thing to the south. Okay? And vehicle traffic. This is a biggie. Frequent vehicle traffic. It degrades habitat, produces noise, disturbs wildlife. You got mortality from collision. The key here is that just like was pointed out earlier, you may want to restrict this during seasonal. Enforce speed limits. Things have changed. Now it's pretty wild to be out there in that country and driving slow. I mean, it's real. Consolidate trips. Okay, let's see here in closing. One of the things that's important is to monitor the wildlife populations to affirm that those mitigations are effective. As an example, you want to sit down and understand where they are with regard to operations. And again, there'll be speakers who will share more about that. Okay, habitat restoration out here. This is a big one. I think it's going to be much more important for us to pay attention to this. The concept about making sure that we do what's necessary to conserve what's in play. So anyway, we hit on the comprehensive master plans, the need to reduce the interim and the initial and interim surface disturbance, consolidating the infrastructure, use of remote sensing, elimination of hazards to wildlife and noise. So in just a little bit there you go. I think if there aren't any, and I can't really see all that well, but I'll also add that with regard to renewable energy, there's a major shift. One of the things about it, whether it's wind or solar, the Bureau is actively moving. We have with our solar development, as I illustrated those examples, moved towards the concept of solar energy zones. We've identified areas with low environmental conflicts, and that's where we want the development to occur. We're in the process of moving forward with the same concept associated with wind. The key here is smart from the start. And then to try to put the emphasis for the project proponents who actually apply and move towards those domains so we can expedite the permitting. We will do, and as we've done with the solar, we've actually done the EIS work that's out there. So the key is the concept of NEPA tiering. So again, a lot of things going on. Glad we had the opportunity to share.